Welcome to Safe Space, the podcast for next generation family business leaders. Today we're joined by Jen Risher out of San Francisco, California. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
So, Jen, before we get started, can you maybe share with the audience a little bit about you, your background, and the book you wrote, which is fascinating?
Thank you. Where to start? I've become a speaker. I've become a philanthropist, an investor, a connector, someone out to change the world, create the world I want to live in. And it really started with an inward look, and that was started by getting really lucky.
Hmm.
So when I was 25, I joined Microsoft as a recruiter. There were a lot of people joining the company at that time. Every Monday was an orientation, and I was part of orientation that day, and I stood in line next to the man that would become my husband. So there it
Wow.
is. Piece of
Really?
luck number one. So David and I got our card keys together. And piece of luck number two is we got stock that ended up being worth millions of dollars. So that was amazing. And 6 years after that orientation, when we met, we were married. We were expecting our first child. And David decided he wanted to join a small startup that was building or selling books on the internet called Amazon.
Oh my
And he
God.
was the 37th employee at Amazon before the company went public. We had our baby. Amazon went public, and suddenly we had really more money than we could wrap our heads around, which of course was amazing. It was sort of this fantasy come true, but it was also very surprising. A lot of emotions, a lot of like, wait, why does no one talk about this? Moving from one socioeconomic class into another is jarring. My identity was at stake. My relationships felt at stake. I didn't know my place in the world anymore. And that was a complete surprise. I hadn't expected anything like that because you don't really hear about the emotional complexities that come with new money.
Societally, we look at folks that have a lot of money in comparison, right, to most folks. And we go, oh my God, life's going to be so grand and they can do whatever they want and the freedom and all that sort of stuff. But yet, as you just said, Jen, people don't talk about what I call the dark side of it or the taboo side of it, which is, the negative emotions that it creates, the pressure that it puts on individuals, and how it's a divider. Money's a great divider between people.
It can be. And I don't know if I'd call it a dark side, but the reality of the fact that you are still yourself. There I was, like this thing had happened, and I wasn't any more wise or gracious or graceful or beautiful or obnoxious. Like I was still me. I still had limitations. I still made mistakes. I still didn't know how to kind of do rich right. That was one of the things that came up for me is like, wait a second, am I getting this wrong? So that was surprising. And yeah, the shift from it was an internal shift that I was dealing with, but also I felt like, are people looking at me differently? Are they seeing my money, but not really seeing me? Even with my parents, I had grown up middle class, saving my pennies, kind of wary of those rich people. And suddenly I had become what really I was prejudiced against. And so I didn't want my parents really to know that I had this new wealth. I didn't want them to look down on me. So that was an issue for me too. And I felt like our friends going to judge me. One of the things that came up right away was, so we had this new baby, incredible. My heart had opened. I had entered this world of parenthood. It was like this curtain had lifted. I was a new mom, and like I couldn't believe it. It was so amazing. And I joined a mother's group and was around a bunch of new women, new mothers who were all going through something similar to what I was going through. How are we going to get our babies to sleep through the night, and how do we deal with our in-laws and the emotions, the roller coaster, so we could share so much, the highs and lows of new parenthood. I had peers. We were in the same space. And at the same time, this other curtain had lifted and I had all this new wealth. And that space was very quiet. No one was talking. I didn't want anyone in my mother's group to know about our wealth. I felt like any other new mom. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be seen as other. I was so in the name of being connected to these women where I felt like I did belong, I really stayed quiet. I kept it hidden. Um, Now, of course, I look back and think, you know, it's exhausting to hide and it takes a lot of energy. And I was making a lot of assumptions that weren't really founded. That's what happens, I think, when we hide first of all, when you hide something, you put it in the dark, that's where shame grows. And it gives that thing you're hiding a lot of power over you. Whereas if you bring it into the light and look at it, then it just becomes a tool that you can discuss and talk about. And so I wasn't bringing it into the light. It was growing and I was making assumptions. I was telling myself stories. Oh, these women would judge me here or I would have this. I didn't really address it because I didn't talk about it.
So, Jen, how did you, and I'm glad you brought up the piece around shame because a lot of, um, particularly next gen family members of wealthy family businesses, feel shame and guilt. Guilt that, I'm part of the lucky club, shame of I haven't really done anything to deserve this. So I'm glad that you brought that up so they can relate to it. So, how did you move it from the darkness of living in the shame? What was the process to go from the darkness of the shame to the light of being comfortable with it? Walk
Yes.
us through that.
I will walk you through that. It's been quite a process, and I have to say, now my daughters are inheritors, and they feel what you're talking about with this next gen. Like I didn't do anything to deserve this, and I feel guilty about this. So. Yes, it doesn't help you, and it doesn't help anyone else. So it's really important to move out of that space. So the way I did, it took many years, and part of the process was writing a book. But what that really was looking at what was going on inside of me. And I think all of us have a money story. It's what we learn when we're kids. It's how we approach money. How did your mother think about saving and giving and spending? How did your father think about money? Where were you in your neighborhood? All these pieces of beliefs and habits that we have around money get instilled within us very early on, and money is very emotional, so it brings up a lot of fear, anxiety, stress, excitement, pride, feeling of isolation, guilt, shame. Like all these emotions are attached to money. And so if we are unaware of our money story, we are unaware of the emotions attached to money, we tend to walk through the world and we're very reactive, and we're kind of on autopilot. So you might get really upset when your partner spends a lot of money and you get up all upset, or you might be really upset when your partner doesn't spend any money. That upsets, like whatever that is, whatever that triggers. Um, it will trigger no matter what. And if you're not aware of why that's happening, you just you get angry. You're probably going to have an argument. But if you are aware, oh yeah, I associate spending with being, frivolous or a bad person, or I associate, not spending as being, greedy or hoarding, like whatever that is coming up for you, to identify it and recognize it so that you can work on it for yourself. It gives you more empathy for yourself and a way to actually override those emotions. It also gives you empathy for your partner because he or she has a different money story and there's a reason why they're spending a lot or not spending. So it's such an important piece of getting to feeling joy and happiness and purpose with money, is to take a deep look at what's going on internally so that you are not on autopilot. And because these emotions are so deep, you're probably going to still see these things coming up. And one of the big ones for me is, when I was growing up, I learned being good, I have to save. My self-worth, my identity, being a good daughter was tied up with being frugal, not being wasteful. So I think good people save money. And so I had to look at that, and intellectually I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. A person's value is not connected to how they use money. And what am I saving? I'm save, 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 save. What am I saving for? Like I really started to look at that more deeply. At the same time, that emotion comes up. So it just the other day, I'm driving around looking for free parking on the street, getting more and more stressed. Where's the free parking lot spot? Like I couldn't find it. And then I have to remind myself, oh, it's okay. You can just pay to park in a lot. That feeling that I have to be a good person, I have to find the free parking spot. It's very deep, but I also can override it and say, okay, let's alleviate some stress in your life. You can pay to park it a lot. So these things come up, they come up. And so just to being aware of it. And so I wrote a book, and that was a really helpful way to really look at deeply at all the places that money had comes up for me. And in sharing my story, my hope, and it's actually happened, is that other people can identify with the things that I've gone through, and it really helps to acknowledge and validate some of these emotions that we have connected to money and connected to wealth.
So, in the work that we do with family businesses and family offices, is we help the individuals uncover what we call their money myth, which is their belief about money. It's a subconscious thing, right? And what we help them understand is that because it's a belief that we carry, we take that belief into every single relationship. And that belief is going to impact and influence every decision we make with money, how we spend it, how we invest it, how we grow it, how we give it away, right? And until, as you said, Jenna, until we really understand what that belief is back here and bring it to the forefront, this belief will run the show. It'll influence everything,
Yes.
right? And we did some early research on this because, I'm kind of geeky about this stuff. And in 2007, I asked myself a question, is there a connection or correlation between how we treat our money or how we do money and how we do relationships and how we treat relationships? And what we discovered is that they're directly correlated.
Interesting.
How we do one, we do the other.
Can you give me an example? That's so interesting. I find this fascinating, and I 100% agree with you. So I'm curious to what you
So,
found.
so everybody has their own money myth, right? So mine used to be money allows me to fit in because I was always told I was born on the wrong side of the tracks. So I made the subconscious decision: if I make a lot of money, then I'll fit in and be one of the cool kids, right? So the research is everybody has their own money myth, but it'll fall into one of four categories. Okay, so there's the investor. So they invest in relationships, they invest their money. They hope that one day they get a return. Then there is the spender, which is they spend their money and then metaphorically spend their relationships. They take. They're not reciprocal. They're constantly taking and depleting. There's the self spender, which gives away of themselves. There's the valuer respecter, which believes they deserve, they look after their relationships and they treasure their possessions. They look after them. And finally, there's the fearer, the one that doesn't believe they deserve or are worthy of financial wealth or relational wealth, so they'll tend to self sabotage.
Hmm. I assume that we all have pieces of all these different.
We do, and yet we have a dominant one. So
We
what
have a dominant.
happens is, if you don't have the awareness or the mindfulness of what these beliefs are, when you're trying to make decisions about money, it's the fearer or the spender or the investor that's really running the show. So imagine if, you're a sibling partnership or you're a couple and one of you is an investor and one of you is a spender, or one of you is a value and one is a fearer. You can have a lot of difficult conversations.
Yes.
And what
Yes, and this
happens
is yeah.
is when we get into arguments with or fights or disagreements, we're not arguing about the situation. We're arguing about what it represents to us.
Yes.
And unless we understand what that representation is or the subjective meaning of it, human beings, we attach subjective meaning to everything. So until we understand what that subjective meaning is, it will run the decisions.
Yes. And this is why I think money is the number one thing that gets in the way of our relationships and breaks up marriages, and but it's not really the money. like you say, it's like all those feelings that are attached to it underneath the surface.
And then the other piece of research that we're doing, which is going to be the new book, my latest book, is around emotional traditions.
Hmm.
There's studies that show that we carry our emotional beliefs and behaviors in our DNA from our parents. It's called epigenetics. So if you look, it'd be interesting to look at a family tree and explore how money was dealt with, what it was thought about, how it was behaved with from generation, and you're going to see that those patterns are still repeated today until you, so there's an old saying that says you know, you either break the pattern or the pattern breaks you.
Yes. And it's very difficult. It takes a lot of work to break those patterns.
Hmm. So once you were able to examine yourself and understand your money story, what did you have to do then to transform it? What was the step from I see it now to being comfortable with it? What was that step?
Yeah. Well, the awareness of it was definitely a key piece of it. I think over the last 6 years since my book was published that I have really kind of seen the biggest shifts. So the book came out in September of 2020, and I began talking, sharing my stories, sharing the story of, all the emotional pieces that came up. And because I do believe we learn from each other's stories. And as I was doing that, I also started to look at our money and think, what is it doing? And what is my bigger purpose with it? And my using my voice and my networks and I started to step into my own power, I think, a little bit with this. And in doing so, I started to focus on equity because I do have, I mean, I got lucky and I have more than I need, and I want, and it doesn't seem quote fair, or this isn't the world I want to live in. I want more. We do want more. We want to connect with other people. And so when there's a big gap, and this is where you were talking about money can get in, come between us. If there's a big gap in the amount of money we have, that it makes it harder to connect if we don't bring it up to the surface and talk through it. And so that's true kind of socially as well. So when we have this incredible wealth gap in our country, and that is harming all of us, it's harming those very clearly those who are suffering without enough, but it's also harming those with too much because we aren't able to connect, we feel isolated, we are not, I mean, we all want connection because that is, money does not bring happiness. It's our connections, our deep relationships, and a sense of purpose, but those connections are so key. So for me it was like, okay, I want to use this power I have within myself as a human being, but also that I have with money to create more equity in the world. And how do I do that? And so, in a number of ways, I became an investor. I had never been interested in investing. It felt like a lot of numbers to me. But when I recognized that it can show up with my values and invest my values. And I learned that women have a really hard time raising venture capital money. 2% of venture capital funding goes to women. And if you're a woman of color, it's even less. Okay, I started to invest with women of color who are fund managers and started to make investments and felt like, okay, this is shifting. The power is shifting the money. This is the direction I want to go. And that was very empowering. I have joined several philanthropic networks as well. My husband and I started something called Half My DAF, which is taking a look at all the philanthropic dollars that are just sitting in these things called donor advised funds. So it's a charitable vehicle. You put your money in, you get your tax break up front, and then you can give over time. So it's a nice tool to organize and make giving easy. And yet what's happening is the money is going in, people are getting their tax break, and the money is sitting. And the more I've gotten into this, the more I recognize that this is a systems problem because the financial incentives of moving that money for the staff sponsors are not really aligned with getting the money moving. So it's also a human problem with people like running up against their own human stuff and not moving the money. So we're really offering incentive as well as urgency around getting money moving. Over the last 5 years, we have moved $70 million out of DAFs. It's created a new benchmark for how much should be given. Foundations have this 5%, which is way too small. So let's move half of it. So that feels like let's get the wealth out and put to work in community with people. So that's another piece that I've been very passionate about and talking about and doing. I think there's also a lot of doing that is very satisfying. I've also been doing a lot of talking. So I've been talking to other people who've been as lucky as I have. And my goal there is to help them move out of that shame place, that hiding place. And it starts with, your own interpersonal conversation with yourself, but conversations within families. conversations with your closest friends, addressing these emotions that come up with money. So let's start talking. Let's kind of get more comfortable with our relationship with money, because that will move us out of guilt or shame and hiding into joy. I mean, we should be, this is an amazing tool we have. And then into meaning and purpose and action with what we have.
It's difficult to get into purpose when you're sitting on shame and guilt,
Yes. It's
right?
very different, and it doesn't feel good. It does not feel good to you. You're just stuck. And so I'm hoping to help unstick people by helping people recognize that their feelings are valid and real, and that they can work with those feelings. They can work with themselves. They don't have to, and they don't have to. I spent, I think, some time myself looking out and feeling completely overwhelmed. Like, what am I going to do? And recognize this is a personal journey. We're all on a very personal journey, and the more vulnerable we can get with ourselves, the more true and authentic we can become, then we can have we can own our power and have purpose.
And the other thing that we're dealing with societally is we're more technologically connected than ever, and yet we're more emotionally disconnected from ourselves and others than ever, right? So when feelings come up, people don't know what to do with them.
Yeah,
So they
what we
either
do with them is,
stuff them down, right? Booze and shopping and work, or they just, like they don't know what to do with these things. So I think part of the journey for all of us is to start to learn to get comfortable with our feelings. They're not bad. They're just feelings. And we also don't want to feel the negative feelings. We want to feel the good ones. And we want to hang on to these things. It's like human beings. We all have pain and we all have fear. And we do whatever it takes to avoid the pain and facing the fear. So we build these constructs to prevent us from feeling this stuff. And what I've learned in my own personal journey, that life happens when I feel. That's the true miracle of life. When I allow myself to feel whatever's there, and don't make it wrong. Feel the shame, feel the guilt, feel the joy, feel the elation, feel it all.
I agree. And instead of feeling, we pick up our phones and get that endorphin hit or whatever. Instead of, yeah, so don't pick up your phone. Sit in that uncomfortable space, the messy space, the fear. It will move through you. You will be more alive because of it. And there's so much joy and juice, I guess, in life,
Mhm.
if you really allow
Yeah,
those feelings to flow through you and to feel them. That's what it's all about, feeling those feelings. That's true.
what
Yes.
I've found in my own journey, and what I help our clients with, is when we find a purpose, our purpose, our purpose becomes bigger than the story, the wound, or the conditioning. So we get drawn towards a purpose and start to move away from the wound. But otherwise, we're stuck in the wound. Nothing changes. So, Jen, we're coming to the top of the show like I knew we would very, very quickly. And I always like to ask our guests the same question. And the question is, what's one piece of advice or wisdom or insight you could offer both a senior generation family member and a next gen family member based on your journey?
Well, I think we just talked about it. It is like getting clear with what you're feeling. For the senior family member, often I think it's fear, fear that something's going to go wrong, loss of control, fear of death. There's a lot of big fears there. Yeah, and you're a human being. It's okay. It's okay to have our feelings and to really get as clear for ourselves about what we really want. Because I think often we, as parents, want to protect our children. We want to control. We want to make sure everything's good for them. But making sure that we're really looking at where that's coming from. Because if that control and that protection is coming out of fear, it's probably not really that strong, or it's not going to get you what you really want. And this is sort of so general. I would want to take something specific, but a key piece, I think, for this family member is to listen to their next gen. This is such a key piece, because I think often the the senior person is like feels like they know it all, and their way was the right way, and now this next gen is doing things so wrong or differently. Or but there's so much to learn about the next generation. The world is changing, things are done differently, and it's, yes, there's some that maybe some pieces that you might not like, but there's so many positives in the way the world is unfolding, and your next gen is thinking about life, and they have a lot of wisdom to share. So it's getting out of your own way, I think, and having that conversation and listening to the next gen. And I think that the next gen are such a beautiful, amazing group of people. The whole new approach to work and life, and the ability to speak up and show up and not put up with things. It's wonderful. So we need to be listening to each other because there's wisdom on the other side as well. Um, so I don't know, that's a kind of very general, but I think it's, starting within yourself and figuring out how close you can get to what's really going on deep within you, and then being open to really listening to the next gen. And because that's ultimately what you really care about, is the connection with your family.
Jen, great response. And if people wanted to find you, how do they find you?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Jennifer Risher. I also have his website, jenniferrisher.com, and Half My DAF. So take a look at what we're doing to move more money and get it put to work in community.
So there you have it, folks. Jen, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your journey, and just being so open and vulnerable. Really appreciate it about topic that is typically taboo, that is not okay to talk about. So here we are, opening it up for you, folks. And listener, as you know, this show is for you. So you don't feel lonely in your journey. Uh, these are similar issues that we all face. So if something that Jen spoke to you about or that you really resonate with, please drop us a note, share with your community, because this is a community endeavor. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.